Wow, it's working. All right. So, welcome everybody to the TCPAworld.com live coverage of the Senate Subcommittee hearing, where they're going to be talking about the TCPA. There's going to be testimony from various witnesses regarding the robocall problem in this country, possible solutions. And we're going to be doing something that no other law firm has ever done, probably because it's not going to work. And we're going to try to do live coverage and analysis of the subcommittee hearing while it's happening live. So I'm not sure exactly how this is going to work. We've got some really awesome folks here at BroadNet that are helping us to do this. But this is live coverage. We're going to see over here on this side the actual Senate subcommittee hearing testimony. And then Puja and I will be here kind of breaking this down. And all of this is made possible by the wonderful folks at the Reassigned Numbers database. Puja? Is this not the craziest thing anyone
This is amazing. I feel like I'm on live television, like Good Morning America, but Good Morning TCPA World.
Good morning, TCPA World. Maybe we'll start making this like a normal segment, like once a week or something. We'll just like get together and do some live coverage or something.
I love it.
But now look, Troutman Amin, LLP, we're always just coming up with new things, always developing new concepts, new ideas, innovating to a level that no other law firms have ever seen. And that's no surprise, because that's what we set out to do. We want to conquer the world. We want to do things a little differently. We want to help people to understand the law. Obviously, we want clients out of this. It's not like we're not trying to market, but really, that's never like our objective. We're never just like, hey, come hire us. We're just kind of helping people to understand what the law is so that they can comply with the law. For instance, we've got this amazing, cool, free, super TCPA annual review, right? If you don't have a copy of this, you really should. It's totally free, and it's sponsored by Trusted Forum, fantastic company, another great company.
I love that's free, and the magazine we charge.
Well, because I'm glad you brought that up. So the TCPA review, right, has like 800 cases in there, all like broken down by me personally to help you to understand what the law is. And so this is like a guide to keep people informed. The magazine is quite pricey, but it's got like you on the cover. And look at this thing; it's so cool. But this has got like really great articles in it, and great analysis that you just can't get anywhere else. So obviously we're going to charge for that. It's a little bit different. Look at this; isn't that a line? Isn't that cool? So anyway, my point is that Troutman Amin is always doing cool things. We're always doing different things. And so obviously we would be the first law firm in the nation to attempt to do. Again, is this going to work? I don't know. We're going to find out. But we've got some great folks helping to produce it. We've got the Reassigned Number database behind us. Let's talk about the Reassigned. What do you think about it?
What do I think about the Reassigned Number database? Yeah. Oh my goodness, where do I start? It is a fantastic tool. We're on stage constantly plugging this thing. With all the class actions that are being filed right now for wrong number suits, it's not only required, but it's recommended, even if it wasn't required, because, hey, it helps you stay out of TCPA class action wrong number suits. So,
did Capital One just get themselves in trouble?
Did you read that case?
We haven't even got the blog up
I know.
Yet.
Come on, Chris.
We're picking on our new guy because he doesn't have his blog up yet.
But, to be fair, I think he's going live.
He's literally at the hearing, right? He could call us at any moment. We had put him on the phone.
Zena, can we call him? Can we figure out if he's there yet?
Yeah. But sticking with Reassigned Number database for a second, right? So those of you that are making outbound calls at scale, you have to understand that I used to say 10% of numbers are reassigned every year, but apparently it's actually much higher than that, which is crazy.
That's just give us
20 million numbers a month are being reassigned. So that's 5% of the entire pool of numbers that are available under the NanoPlat are being reassigned every month. Now there's going to be some like repeat, so it's not like 60% of numbers get reassigned every month. We do 5 times 12, but it is significantly more than 10% of every phone number in America is being reassigned every single month. And so if your portfolio of numbers, if you have 1 million numbers, that means like at least 100,000 of your numbers are being reassigned every year. And so if you're calling a phone number and that number has changed hands, you have to understand under the TCPA, you are liable for that. It's strict liability. And in the old days before the Reassigned Number database was available, some courts would look at that and say, it's not fair. We're going to find a good faith defense or whatever. But since the reassigned number database has come out, the courts have had like zero mercy, just zero. And Capital One, great company, great brand, I really like them. They're caught in a TCPA class action around reassigned numbers, right? And we saw Citibank was caught in a similar case. So, I mean, these are major brands. And we know, of course, Mike Greenwald, who's, Mr. Number One on the TCPA World Power Rankings. If you're on TCPA World right now, you can scroll down, you'll find our power rankings right there. Just kind of look at those. Mike Greenwald, one of the most dangerous attorneys in the country, on the plaintiff side, he brings these wrong number class actions all the time. This is bread and butter. That's what he does. And his point is, look, if you're not using the reassigned number database right now, you're just asking for it. Like, right. We're going to sue you. And he's very clear that if you are using the database, then he's not going to sue you. So I don't know. I don't know what better plug there is for the database than if you use it, the guy who brings most of these cases won't sue you. All right. So that's enough on the reassigned number database for now. But they're great folks. Really grateful that they're sponsoring us. As we start thinking about the Senate hearing that's coming up here in just about 8 minutes, Puja, how did we get here? Let's level set and kind of help everyone understand why are we having the subcommittee hearing? What's going on in the background? What's kind of led up to this?
Well, I'd like to say it's Margaret Sanders is the reason why I end up here because she keeps Margot.
Margaret.
Margaret.
I mean, that's pretty funny.
She sounds like a Margaret. If I ever saw her in person, she'd be a Margaret.
You call her Margaret.
I call her.
Yeah. Okay.
Margot. I thought Margot was short.
Wouldn't it be funny if it was? I don't think so. I don't think it's like a loving nickname. It's like my kid's name is Rick. I call him Rio. I don't think it's Margaret. We call her Margot. I think her name is actually Margaret.
Well, yeah. Either way, I don't care much for her name regardless. Well, really, it's because, consumers are complaining about these robocalls in America and, Congress wants to do something about it, whatever that doing is. We're about to find out if we're making any kind of movement. We know that the FCC has been extremely active recently on, taking down robocallers and whatnot. But I mean, really, I think the reason we got here is because of consumers receiving more and more robocalls.
But they're receiving less and less robocalls.
Well, it's more complaints. It's more complaints about the robocalls that have gone up, right, in the recent years.
Why is that? If robocalls are going down, why are complaints going up? Or maybe that's just an illusion. Maybe we just think that's what's happening.
Maybe because Margot's behind it.
That's what I think. I think there's some saber rattling. So I think there's a couple things going on.
Yeah.
Right? So right now, as we know, Congress is completely dysfunctional because the party system doesn't work. And if you can just stop for a second and think about the fact that the Republicans can't get a Speaker of the House elected so that we can move forward, it's just our system is frankly so dumb, right? I mean, if you pause to think that this Hakeem Jeffries guy right, has actually won the vote repeatedly, in any other system, the Democrats' pick would now be the Speaker of the House because he literally won the election for Speaker of the House 16 times in a row, right? Yet in our system, we have this thing called the majority party gets to decide who's going to be the Speaker of the House, which is just so completely unconstitutional. If you look at the Constitution, there is nothing in there that says the majority party gets to decide who the Speaker of the House is. So it's completely dysfunctional. And the two sides are completely ineffective. Both of them are completely ineffective at governing. Completely. They have no plan, no strategy, none. All they do all day long is fight with each other because the only thing that they're good at is getting you to hate the other side. That's it. If you're a Republican, right, you are taught to hate the liberals. And if you are a Democrat, you are taught to hate and fear the Republicans. And that's all they're good at. That's all they can do. What they can't do is govern. So what does it have to do with robocalls? Well, robocalls is the one thing that everybody hates, right? It's the one thing that both sides have agreed is not good. There's really nothing else in America that both sides have decided, yeah, we're against this, except for robocalls. So it's an easy way to score a political victory. It's an easy way, in my view, for Congress to look like it's not entirely dysfunctional, even though it is because of the party system. And the poor candidates that keep getting elected as part of this ridiculous system. We just hire puppets. We don't actually hire people to go be our representatives. We just hire puppets who are going to do what the party leaders tell them to do. It's disgusting, but that's the system that we have right now. We probably fix it. But I've got some other things I'm working on right now. But in any event, but robocalls is low-hanging fruit, right? It's low-hanging fruit. So we're going to have a hearing. And unfortunately, the entire tenor and drive of the hearing, Margot, right, being the leader here, behind it is going to be that robocalls are bad, American businesses are bad, they don't care about consumers, blah, 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 blah. Never mind, right? Never mind that really what's happening in front of the FCC right now, what the FTC has done is really take away consumer choice, right? Consumers have raised their hand and like, hey, I want to hear it from 5 banks so that I can win, right? Now they're being strict with that ability. And they're being told that, no, you have to go, instead of just going to one website where you can hear from 5 different people, you now have to go to 5 different websites, and you have to spend more time researching, put yourself at greater risk of coming upon a bad actor out there who's going to not be a trusted brand, not be a trusted website, steal your data, misuse your data, all because of some misapprehension, right, that consumers don't want to hear from brands that they literally have asked to hear about. Now, without question, the lead generation industry has really brought some of this upon themselves. They have caused a lot of mischief, and there's a lot of brands out there in the lead generation space who thought it was okay, basically, to remove friction in the funnel, by which that's code for like just slipping in the smallest, tiniest little disclosures, really kind of confusing consumers in terms of what was going to happen next in the flow. And no surprise, right? That's led to a lot of consumers receiving calls they weren't expecting. The data gets sold over and over and over again. There was no standards. There was no regulation. And so industry really brought a lot of this upon themselves. They really did abuse the consumer, and that is a terrible thing. And really, it took me, of course, and you, and our efforts in creating, first going on stage over and over and over again, right? We'd go to these trade shows. You'll like this, America. We'd go to these trade shows, and we would tell people, guys, you have to stop behaving this way. And we put up like live screens of like the websites that were problematic. And of course, the guys running these websites are on the board, right, of the committees that are throwing the conferences. And they're like, get these 2 off the stage, right? Like we got blacklisted a bunch of times. Like people didn't want us there. They're like, no, we're not going to listen to you. You're not allowed to speak anymore because you're attacking us. And I'm like, dude, you're not following the law. You're mistreating consumers. And so we basically, got kicked off the table because we were trying to tell people to comply with the law. They didn't like it. They didn't like us bringing standards. And so we had to start our own organization called REACH, right? Responsible Enterprises Against Consumer Harassment, to really try to level set and provide standards for an industry that just refused to abide by any standards. They just refused. I mean, any real standards. They had like some standards, but like they were not real in my opinion, right? There was nothing that was black and white about what was required. How many times you sell a lead, what the form had to look like, the transparency, the white and black background, so we've got now this Surgeon General's box that we think ought to be required before a consumer agrees with robocall or agrees to receive robocalls. Right? We really want to empower that consumer. We want that consumer to understand fully what's going to happen, and that's all in the REACH standards. REACH, of course, is the new most powerful trade organization out there that's really driving toward, on the one hand, getting unwanted calls to stop, setting strict standards, but on the other hand, advocating to the FCC, advocating to Congress and others that, hey, look, business does need some breathing room here, right? It's a give and a take. You can't just shut down the entire lead generation industry. Lead generation is a superpower for this country. So that was a long soliloquy. It brought us up to the 7 a.m. I'm not sure, hopefully we can get the little box with the Senate subcommittee hearing up there. See, look, it's magic. I ask and I receive. I love that. These things notoriously start late, by the way. So, we're going to hang out. Obviously, once they start talking, we're going to go in and out of coverage here. We're going to provide some analysis, but we're going to try to listen in to what they have to say as well. It's going to be interesting to see how this works. But we should get these folks starting here in the next 5 minutes or so. We are expecting testimony from 4 witnesses. They are likely to just have prepared remarks that they're going to be reading off of a page. I hate that. Like, if you don't have something to say live, maybe you should be testifying in front of Congress, just my opinion. But they will be taking questions, I believe. We'll see. Sometimes questions get asked, sometimes they don't. I'm informed that today is a travel day. So members of Congress are coming back to DC from kind of being off. So they may or may not, be there in full force. We'll just have to wait and see kind of what it looks like. If it seems like I have inside baseball on, the subcommittee hearing, of course I knew about this over a month ago. It's because I do. I mean, you guys know, I talked to a lot of staffers. I talked to a lot of folks on the Hill, and then also, of course, at the commission. And, they like to keep me informed because I like to keep you informed, right? TCPA world, as you know, is a great channel of communication to deliver official, but many times unofficial information that people ought to be aware of. I share as much as I can. Many times I can't share everything I know. In fact, I know so many things it would blow your mind that I can't share. But I do share as much as I can. I leave breadcrumbs wherever I can. I do know a little bit about what to expect today, and we'll provide some pretty good coverage. What are you looking to hear from Margaret?
I mean, what am I looking forward to? That I know that's not going to happen. I'm looking forward to her mentioning Reach. Is she even aware of Reach? I know you've had conversations.
Of course she's aware of Reach.
I'm curious to see if she even mentions trade organizations that are looking to do the right thing here, right?
That's a good question.
Like, does she even acknowledge that there are good American businesses out there that, aren't making robocalls? Or is she just completely, naive or chooses to be naive, I guess I'll say. Obviously she's aware, but I'm curious because I've actually never seen her testify. I've never heard her speak. So I'm
very shrill.
Yeah, so I'm really curious to see, if she's just completely one-sided or if she at least acknowledges that there's folks out there to be trying to do the right thing, but then she still disagrees with the methods that they're trying to implement.
So it's too early for a drinking game.
Yeah.
I mean, literally it was dark when we started on the West Coast. But if it wasn't, I would do a game like we'll do a shot every time she says she represents low-income clients.
Oh, is that her phrase?
Yeah. So, the NCLC, which is the National Consumer Law Center, purports to represent the interests of poor consumers in this country, right? And they always have this line. She says it every time she testifies. It's in every comment she does. The NCLC, on behalf of its low-income clients, and she says it repeatedly, and it's just not true, right? I mean, I guess I shouldn't say it's just. But in my view, right, what's really going on is that they represent the interests of the plaintiff's bar. And they scraped millions of dollars, millions, from TCPA judgments, from TCPA settlements, where these plaintiffs' lawyers funnel money back to the NCLC, millions of dollars, right, through what's called Cypre, right, which is supposed to be a charitable donation, right, that for money that's left over that the class doesn't claim. And because there's so much money in TCPA cases, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars a year in TCPA settlements, right? Even if 1% of that money goes to donations to a charity, it's millions of dollars that we're talking about. And guess what? The NCLC is the charity that the plaintiffs' lawyers choose, right? And of course, this charity is out there talking about how the TCPA needs to be broad and consumers need to be able to sue more under it. And for those of you just joining us, we're waiting for the subcommittee hearing to start. I don't think it started yet. As soon as it does, I think our folks over at Broadnet will pop this up. All right, well, let's go listen to it. All right, we're listening to them. Get the audio up, please.
For being here with us, as she always is, but especially to serve in an important role today as well. So I want to thank you, Senator Fisher, for
Senator Lujan. He's the ranking member.
And today we will hear from expert witnesses on protecting our constituents from the growing number of fraudulent and illegal robocalls and robotexts. Every month, Americans receive roughly 1.5 billion to 3 billion scam calls and
I see.
likely illegal telemarketing calls. This is an issue that I'm confident everyone in the room has dealt with.
I like how he said
for those of you that have your phones on, I'm sure you're going to receive robocalls and robotexts that are predatory, even during this hearing, and I would not be surprised if we did as well. Robocalls, they interrupt sleep if you're not putting your phones in some privacy mode or sleep mode or turning them off themselves. They interrupt time with friends and family. And as I said, even during hearings, I won't be surprised if they came up. So if they do, feel free to hold your phone up and share with the rest of America what's happening while we're in this room. Robocalls have eroded trust in our nation's communications networks. I know many in my family, including myself, that you'll look at the phone now and you're not sure where it's coming from. And some of the phone providers are putting scam alerts, or maybe it's some other call. And folks will look at their device and they'll drop it.
Scam alerts, right? These scam alerts are never accurate. They're never accurate. Can we keep our audio and that audio going at the same time? Or we don't have to choose one or the other, right? We would like to have our audio and also Senate Subcommittee hearing.
In 1991, Congress passed the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, the TCPA, and more recently, the telephone robocall abuse.
All right, folks, this is our first time doing this. So we're working through it live.
Which
We'll figure it out.
acronym is TRACED.
Weird.
That was back in 2019. These tools seek to protect Americans from predatory and unsolicited robocalls and robotexts, giving federal agencies the tools to fight back. And in some ways, the TCPA and TRACED, as they were implemented, the number of unsolicited and illegal telemarketing calls has decreased. Do not call complaints at the FCC have reduced as well.
You're welcome,
entirely,
everybody.
but by some numbers.
Yeah,
and the Federal Communications Commission has issued $500 million in enforcement actions against robocalls over the last 12 months. The FCC has empowered the industry traceback group and phone companies to block by default illegal or unwanted calls.
Well, Trace is doing some good work. I'm not saying
No, I'm saying it's good that they're crediting it.
Commission provided a statement for today's hearing, and without objection, I would like to enter it into the record.
There's a statement.
We'll enter that. However, it is important that we recognize that robocalls and robotexts are not just a nuisance. Scammers use our telecom networks to defraud Americans out of an estimated $39 billion.
Agreed. You have to stop the scammers. No question.
Certainly enough money to provide affordable broadband to the current 21 million households enrolled in the Affordable Connectivity Program for 8 years. I hope we understand the magnitude of what that $39 billion.
That's a weird analogy. Not enough to enroll people in rural broadband for 8 years.
Using our telecom network to do so, and they don't face any consequences. The FCC levies fines, but fines go uncollected, and the company dissolves and moves assets elsewhere.
You weren't kidding when you were saying that they're just reading.
Our regulators and enforcement.
You always tell me not to prepare. How's that fair?
When an individual or company breaks the law, they are held to account.
I like it. He reads well.
Tricking consumers and evading enforcement is that the technology is constantly evolving. We will hear testimony that suggests consumer consent for telemarketing is increasingly falsified.
Because you have
automated bots and other artificial intelligence systems are using public data to consent on behalf of a consumer for calls they never asked for and do not want. Automated robocalls and robotexts are using chatbots and generative artificial intelligence to impersonate a real, live person, lulling the recipient into a false sense of security by mimicking voices and mannerisms. In the most frightening examples, bad actors are playing on our emotions and impersonating loved ones in distress.
Wow.
Earlier this year in the Senate Human Rights Subcommittee, Senator Asa, member Blackburn, her testimony from Jennifer DeStefano of Arizona, who was a victim of a scam call impersonating her daughter. And without objection, I would like to enter her testimony into the record for today's hearing. Hearing none, it's entered. Now, she testified, quote, AI is revolutionizing and unraveling the very foundation of our social fabric by creating doubt and fear in what was once never questioned, the sound of a loved one's voice. This hearing will examine how robocallers are evading enforcement, consider public-private efforts to combat illegal robocalls, unravel how new and evolving technologies are changing the landscape, and investigate what next steps are needed to protect Americans from fraudulent and illegal text messages and calls. I'm very excited that we have the panel that we have with us today. I'll introduce each of you momentarily, but first I want to recognize a friend and a leader that is with us today.
No, he's reading.
Over to Ranking Member Fisher for her opening comments.
Good morning.
Some opening comments now from Ranking Member Fisher. Another senator.
Another one reading.
The persistent issue of illegal robocalls has been a long-standing concern of mine. Nationwide, illegal and spoofed robocalls continue to be the #1 consumer complaint. I want to ensure that we have the right tools in place to protect consumers from these calls that prey on them. As we all know, our phones give us connection to the world around us, whether it's calling family, friends, or colleagues, scheduling appointments.
This is fun, folks. We're going to be quiet a lot of this that you can hear and we can hear. We're kind of enjoying this together. When there's something worth reacting to, we will react.
Our phone numbers are a very personal part of our identities as well. We use them to verify who we are, and we hold on to them for decades, sometimes for a lifetime. But as we know too well, this allows scammers to reach directly into our homes and into our pockets. Bad actors are increasingly savvy in the technologies they use to defraud consumers. This can result in devastating financial losses. Criminals are engaging in more targeted calls and impersonating businesses like banks.
Nothing new to see here so far. There's some perfunctory
Phone
remarks.
scams
that we're
are still
expecting to see.
yielding the highest
But it
reported
kind of gives you the
fraud
mindset
losses per
of
person.
the Congress
Despite the
members
rapid
here.
growth of scammers on social
Robocalls are bad, but you see there's no effort to disambiguate
fraud losses
telemarketing,
from phone
legitimate
scams
outbound
are
calls
higher than
from
ever.
scamming and
According
spamming,
to a
right?
recent report,
They're
over
all
68
thrown
million
together as
Americans
robocall.
lost approximately $40 billion to phone scams.
It's very challenging. You're talking about Americans losing $40 billion to scams. In the same breath, you're talking
had
about
this conversation
wanted
so many
marketing
times
calls and
over so
even
many
informational
years.
outbound.
But crucially, in 2019, Congress passed the TRACE Act to put wide-ranging solutions in motion that would reduce illegal robocalls. I commend my colleague, Senator Thune, for leading this legislation, and I was glad to be a co-sponsor of it. Previously, I also led the Spoofing Prevention Act with Senator Bill Nelson, which passed into law in 2018. This law was a foundational.
Am I allowed to tell people what you're texting about right now?
Yeah.
So,
boost enforcement
a serial
tools that
plaintiff,
fight illegal
attorney,
spoofing.
Mike Greenwald, is
Through
texting
fines
Eric
for
in
illegal
live
robocall
time,
activities
talking
is
about
a key
his
part
reassigned
of
number
cracking down
database.
on nuisance calls that endanger
Comment
consumers.
about
On this
Greenwald.
front, federal agencies, particularly the Justice Department, must improve how they work together to ensure that unpaid fines are collected.
This is an interesting
are
point.
civil
This is something that
bullets
Congress is
to
considering
eradicate the
legislation
scourge
right
of
now in
illegal
unpaid
scam
fines
calls
the
and
FCC
texts.
is collecting.
Lawmakers
I'm on
have
record.
to remain
I'm
vigilant
not collecting.
and monitor how illegal
Supporting
robocall
collecting
schemes
these
are
fines
evolving.
before using
We
them
must be able to
defray the
empower
cost of things
consumers
like
with
the
the knowledge
DNC
of
and the
who's
RFP.
actually
Smart.
calling them and the
You'll be
ability to
predators.
block illegal
Yeah.
callers.
That's good.
We all
Think about
share
that.
the goal of being able to pick up our phones safely, trusting that we know who's going to be on the other end of the line. But we are not there just yet. The industry has made commendable efforts to reduce the prevalence of these illegal calls, including through
Hold on.
advancements in call to authorize them
Shake and stir.
and traceback
stir.
technology.
She's not
The
as-
statistics from the federally designated Traceback Consortium, ITC, indicate that certain common robocall scams have started to decline over the last couple of years. Continuing this trend will take the united cooperation of all voice service providers. As lawmakers, we need to maintain this momentum and ensure that traceback efforts are fully supported.
Blinds, yeah?
I urge the FCC to spend its time and resources to prevent genuine criminal activity and create meaningful safe harbors for businesses acting in good faith compliance with the law. I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses about where we are in this effort and where additional assistance may be needed. Thank you for being here.
So it sounds like they're looking for additional safe harbors for the carriers, which is just a disaster. The carriers are already blocking immunity. They're already labeling with immunity. The last thing we need is more protection for the carriers.
Right.
But especially in this case, when it comes to robocalls or robotexts and what you've been doing to work to bring support to the American people. So thank you so very much for that. As I introduce the panel, after the introduction, we'll then hear from Ms. Saunders. But Ms. Saunders, who is the senior attorney from the
Margo.
Consumer Law Center.
Boo hiss.
Thank you
I have
much
to get
for
up.
doing this.
Here we go.
Ms. Megan Brown, a member of the United States Chamber of Commerce's Cybersecurity Leadership Council and partner. Willie Ryan, I believe, is with us as well. Wiley. Mr. Josh Berkey. Like the city. I appreciate that, Josh. Mr.
Yeah, that's the name of
Berkey,
the witnesses.
Executive Director, Industry
Great
Traceback.
crew. Margo Saunders, right, at the NCLC. Of course, you've got the partner at Wiley, who represents the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. You've got Josh, who's the head of
Rudolph, the Chief Technology Officer.
Also the Chief Technology Officer at
today.
UMass.
Ms. Saunders, the floor is yours for your opening statement.
Here we go, Margo.
Senator Fisher, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on what needs to be done to protect Americans from robocalls. I provide my testimony today on behalf of the low-income clients of the National Consumer Law
There it is, the low-income clients. You take millions from the plaintiff's bar.
The current regulatory structure allows criminals access to Americans' wallets. As you cited, billions of dollars are stolen every year through scams executed over this nation's telephones. At the same time, the combination of scam calls, along with the onslaught of illegal and unwanted telemarketing calls, have damaged our trust in our phones and made it more difficult for legitimate, wanted messages to reach us. The FCC has been trying to solve the problem, but to date, its methods have not succeeded. In my testimony, you can see a graph of the number of robocalls and telemarketing calls and scam calls over the years. And it looks like that, unfortunately, we are about today where we were in 2019 in terms of the combined number of calls. But either the FCC does not have sufficient legal tools to stop the calls, or it has not yet determined how to deploy those tools effectively.
There's no solution.
The Commission has issued numerous regulations to implement the Trace Act, brought multiple enforcement actions against scam callers and their complicit voice service providers, yet the numbers of calls and the losses to Americans are continuing. The problem is that complicit voice service providers responsible for these calls are making money for transmitting them. And as FCC Commissioner Jeffrey Stark said, quote, illegal robocalls will continue so long as those initiating and facilitating them can get away with it and profit from it, end quote. To eliminate these calls, there must be incentives for compliance, which there are not currently. We believe that the calls can be dramatically reduced, but the resolution requires a shift in emphasis by the FCC. The primary goal of the FCC's actions should be to protect the nation's telephone subscribers from the scam calls that are stealing billions of dollars.
I agree.
To do that requires a change from ensuring that calls can be completed and protecting voice service providers' access to the telephone network towards shielding consumers from these illegal calls. If the FCC were to adopt a system under which it quickly suspends the ability of a voice service provider to participate in the network once that provider is determined to be a repeat offender, we think that would be a magic bullet. This is along the lines of the temporary restraining order procedure established in the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure.
You're talking about the FCC
There
now shutting
are
down voice
procedures that can be used that we think would change the incentive structure
failures to comply with purchase of robocall
cause a reduction in the
The
cost.
FCC already has that power.
Additionally,
the FCC
the FCC's current regulations prohibit telemarketers from calling our phones without express written consent.
Here we go, folks. Hold on.
Telemarketers routinely ignore the specific requirements of these regulations and make about 1 billion illegal telemarketing calls every month. Then they defend themselves from government and private enforcement by relying on specious consent agreements that were
Here we go. Lead generators?
completely fabricated or based on supposed consent
all lead
agreements
generators.
sold and resold and sold again by lead generators.
Old and resold
The
and
FCC
sold
has
again.
to eliminate this entire business model by simply reiterating its current regulation.
Wow, you heard it
She
live.
wants to
Unfortunately,
eliminate
it has
the
proposed
entire
new
business model.
regulations
You heard it.
that are less protective of consumers.
You heard it,
In a
folks.
nutshell,
Can't be any clearer than
I
that.
believe that the FCC could eliminate most of these illegal calls by changing their current emphasis. In a civilization in which we can take pictures of Saturn's rings, the failure
all
to
those
solve
people-
this
those-
problem is not a matter of technology. It's a question of whether the people in power actually want to solve it. Thank you very much.
Ah,
The floor is yours.
that was amazing.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chairman Lujan, Ranking Member Fisher, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Megan Brown, and I'm a partner in the telecom, media, and technology practice at Wiley Ryan. I'm here on behalf of the U.S. Chamber's Institute for Legal Reform. The U.S. Chamber is the world's largest business federation, representing the interests of more than 3 million businesses of all sizes and sectors, as well as state and local chambers and industry associations. Its Institute for Legal Reform is a division of the Chamber that promotes civil justice reform at the global, national, state, and local levels. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. The Chamber has been involved in robocalling issues for years and offers the perspective of the American business community, which values reliable and trustworthy ways to communicate with customers and the public. This is a highly regulated space with lots of litigation, something the Chamber has been vocal about for years, because TCPA remains a major source of class action litigation that in its view does little to help consumers. So the Chamber today would like the committee to leave with 4 main points.
I can't even
American
understand what she's saying.
businesses support cracking
Brown.
down on illegal and abusive robocalls. Businesses want consumers to continue to trust the ecosystem and answer their calls and texts. American businesses work hard to comply with these very complex regulations at the federal and state level. They are hurt by caller ID spoofing and fraud against consumers. And because of those harms, companies are fighting back against robocall scams. For example, Marriott did its own investigation into millions of calls placed illegally misusing its brand. It worked with the industry traceback group and UMail, and then it sued the malicious robocallers, getting an injunction against the marketing agency that placed all these calls. Bless you. U.S. businesses take the law seriously and work hard to comply with it. Second, Congress has passed major legislation recently on a bipartisan basis to address illegal robocalls. You can ensure that your hard work bears fruit by encouraging the Department of Justice to make robocall scams and illegal spoofing a priority. The Federal Communications Commission has taken major steps to implement all of this new congressional direction. And I know FCC staff have been working really hard on these issues. They've issued enormous forfeiture orders against bad actors that blatantly break the law.
Coming back
And
to the lack of elected funds
has been
here.
particularly impactful. Likewise, the Federal Trade Commission has been addressing scams using illegal robocalls and texts, and state attorneys general have partnered with federal agencies and bring their own cases. DOJ, however, is a vital partner here, and Congress should urge the department to make enforcement a priority by acting aggressively on the referrals it gets from the FCC and by bringing its own cases directly for violations of laws like the Truth in Caller ID Act, but also
Interesting to hear the U.S. Chamber of Commerce encouraging Congress to push DOJ to enforce fines. I wasn't expecting that.
The TCPA's private right of action and statutory damages continue to fuel abusive litigation against American businesses. The Institute for Legal Reform has tracked lawsuit abuse for years, and the operating environment under the TCPA continues to hurt businesses and consumers. Class actions seeking enormous damages and attorney's fees, professional TCPA plaintiffs, and the threat of crushing liability for mistakes creates a challenging environment for American businesses. An important takeaway here is that the TCPA class actions and those large settlements do not address the bad actors that are intentionally violating federal law to send millions of illegal calls. Here I have in mind people like Adrian Abramovich, Greg Robbins, John Spillers, or the shell companies that they use to make massive numbers of fraudulent calls, often pretending to be legitimate American businesses. Fourth, the Chamber knows that some on this committee are considering additional legislation. Congress has been active on robocalling over the past several years, and the Chamber suggests that if the committee goes forward with legislation, it should also consider modest but important changes that would limit the abuse of our judicial system to TCPA class actions that do not stop bad actors. So in sum, the Senate appreciates the committee's attention to these issues, as well as
She's speaking too fast.
FCC,
Man, I would've crushed it.
agencies, and the other panelists here to go after bad actors that abuse our networks, steal corporate goodwill, and harm consumers. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
That's it. That's it, Ms. Brown.
She was fine. It wasn't bad. It was just a little low impact. That's all.
We need a little bit of impact here.
Thank you.
Good job.
And Ranking Member Fisher for the opportunity to join this important conversation. I am Josh Berkey, Executive Director of the Industry Traceback Group, or ITG, and I also serve as Vice President Policy and Advocacy at U.S. Telecom, the Broadband Association. U.S. Telecom established the ITG to address the illegal robocall problem. And today, pursuant to the Trace Act, the ITG is designated by the FCC as the official consortium to trace back unlawful robocalls. We are proud to support the FCC, FTC, DOJ, state attorneys general, and other government efforts to stop illegal robocalls through our traceback data. And I'm pleased to be here today to discuss that collective effort and how Congress can bolster it. As I explained in my written testimony, various technological and economic changes have made it cheap and easy for bad actors to call American consumers from anywhere in the world. All anyone needs to initiate robocalls is a computer, some associated software, and a website. In the past, providers had no way to know the true origin of the calls. Industry Traceback solves for that by piecing together the entire path of any given suspicious call, regardless of the number of providers involved. We obtain within a day or two the same information that would take enforcement agencies multiple months to get via subpoenas. And virtually all of the data we get makes its way to those enforcement agencies. Thanks to ITG data, federal and state agencies are bringing more enforcement actions against illegal robocallers than ever before. And these efforts are working. For example, data from my colleagues at UMail show that scam robocall volumes have dropped over 50% from their peak in October 2019. And after FCC and state enforcement actions based on ITG tracebacks, the billions of auto warranty robocalls that were plaguing Americans early last year have dropped almost to zero. Notably, even absent any affirmative enforcement action, tracebacks disrupt illegal robocalls in real time. Nearly 85% of completed tracebacks result in the originating provider warning or firing its offending customer. But as industry and government innovate to fight illegal robocalls, so do their perpetrators. For instance, instead of robocalls, scammers are now making more targeted live calls, sometimes combined with communications through other channels. Scammers know precisely who they are calling as they convincingly pretend to be your bank, for example. Also, the decline in scam robocalls has been supplanted by a substantial rise in unsolicited and unwanted telemarketing robocalls. These are the robocalls your constituents are most likely to receive today. A consumer may sign up on a job listing website, for example, but miss the fine print linking to a second page with hundreds or thousands of marketing partners that each now purportedly have the consumer's consent for robocalls. Even worse, ITG evidence suggests that these already flimsy claims of consent could be entirely falsified by bots consenting on behalf of consumers for calls they never asked for and do not want. The call authentication framework makes it harder to send spoofed calls to consumers. Prolific robocallers now engage in number rotation, where they cycle through assigned, not spoofed numbers, sometimes for a single call per number. This practice is intended to evade industry safeguards and harms both consumers and legitimate callers.
This is our friend in the space. Listen to what he said.
In my testimony, I provide several steps that Congress can take to further empower industry and government efforts to stop illegal robocalls, but I wanted to emphasize a few today. First, Congress should ensure that DOJ prioritizes prosecuting the criminals behind unlawful robocalls. Second, to address problematic number rotation, Congress should formally expand the role of the Traceback Consortium to investigate how bad actors get access to scores of numbers. Third, Congress should reintroduce and pass the Robocall Traceback Enhancement Act, which Senators Thune and Markey introduced last Congress to protect the consortium in the work protecting consumers. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak. We look forward to continuing to collaborate with this subcommittee and federal and state government partners in solving illegal
robocalls. Very much for your testimony today as well. Mr. Rudolph, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Floor is yours.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today regarding robocalls, robotexts, targeted attacks like vishing and smishing. I'm a CTO, so I'm going to introduce a whole bunch of acronyms and new terms. I apologize. The landscape of threats, tools, and enforcement. My name is Mike Rudolph, and I'm the CTO at UMail. UMail provides a service that protects individuals from harmful calls and texts, and we publish the Robocall Index, summarizing nationwide and state robocall data. We also provide blocking, analysis, audit, and investigative services to communication providers, enterprises, investment firms, and government agencies. I worked with many Fortune 500 companies helping mitigate risk through automated controls and policies to comply with things like the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. and implement processes performing background checks and pre-employment screening. I see similar patterns and needs emerging in communications. Now is robocall mitigation controls and know your customer policies that balance the levers of risk and revenue at communication providers who can control those levers. I'm honored to work with the talented UML team on the front lines of investigations, disruptions, and enforcement. Our team is small given the demands to monitor tens of thousands of monthly and weekly active messaging and voice campaigns targeting consumers. Some of our prioritized targeted success here in industry is well chronicled, working with states, particularly attorney general's offices, federal agencies, and private industry, such as one of Wiley's clients, resulting in 90 to 100% reduction when we target specific robocall campaigns. I thank and commend those partners that made the identification and disruption of those campaigns a top priority for their fraud, cyber, or legal teams. Without their collaboration, it's significantly harder to escalate a robocall campaign from simply being unwanted and deceptive all the way up to unlawful and illegal, so we can take action. When the FCC identified specific robo campaigns as poison pills for industry, I observed many providers that were previously uncertain about how to treat those calls suddenly decide with decisive action how to stop them. We can credit 2022 as the year unwanted auto warranty calls were stopped. However, now we have home warranty, debt reduction, government grant, loan and insurance calls taking their place. Robo operators feverishly evolve their tactics in this cat and mouse game, and some embrace new techniques and tactics like generative AI, shifting from spoofing of numbers to using real numbers, and have adopted strategies to minimize the evidence they leave behind, which is necessary for companies like ours, the ITG, and the FCC.
Any of these takes are. I mean, this is why Congress is so ill-informed, because the witnesses they choose are really not laying out the groundwork. They're not explaining it. You could take a Deserve to Win episode and play it to Congress, and you get much better impact in education.
Maybe that's intentional. It's not to put the truth in front of Congress.
Airline travelers every time they fly. By our estimates, we have endured over 250 billion, that's a $250 billion robocalls since 2019, about 1,000 per American adult. We've taken a bite out of several of the most prolific robocall operations responsible for these few billion calls. It's not just a sheer volume game, as every robocall campaign is different, and we are now in an era where there's fewer but more advanced calls causing more harm per call. There is no shortage of work to do if we're to continue to make progress. I look forward to your questions.
All right, another question.
Thank you so very much as well for being with us today. I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Now, as you all can see on the image behind me, there are multiple examples of scammers impersonating companies to trick consumers and steal their information. Now, these are real messages collected by my staff, but the links were changed so that we don't inadvertently encourage people to go to these links as well, and therefore supporting that fraud. Now, this is a problem for so many industries, from delivery services to streaming platforms to financial institutions to government agencies. And I very much appreciate the groups that are walking in now. I don't want to detract from the questions that I have, but you all know what robocalls are and robotexts are with your devices. I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding yes. I'm sure you're tired of them and you want them to end. That's what this hearing is about. And so if you all have ideas as well, we'd invite them to be submitted to us.
About robocalls and texts, but no one has a solution yet. No, but they don't. But no one's talking about a solution.
They don't understand. Yes or no? Hear these superficial testimonies. No wonder they don't understand. They don't understand it. They can't do anything with it.
The ability of your member companies to reach and build relationships with consumers. Your microphone.
Oh, got it. Sorry. Thank you. Sorry about that. I don't know that it lends itself to a clean yes or no. The chamber is really concerned about business impersonation, fraud, and the texts that you see. But I think I don't know that we have seen a noticeable harm to the overall business relationship with our customers. Like, it's a part of the package, and I think the chamber members do a good job of keeping those relationships. But it is a worry, the brand dilution, and for instance, the reactions that I mentioned earlier, it is a concern that the brands will be diluted by this kind of fraud.
All four of the major banks were on
experience, and there are some companies when they call
their
my
brand.
phone, I will not answer because I've been hit over and over by robocalls from them. There are some companies where they've been spoofed before, but it's not been time and time again. But I'm less likely to answer them, where I'm very cautious as well. Now that's my behavior. I don't know if that's consistent with others across the room. But when I was asking that, I saw a lot of heads nodding yes. And so we want to make sure that there is that trust that can be established with this form of communication. So I appreciate that. My follow-up is, Ms. Saunders, I want to talk about the impact on consumers specifically. Can you share examples how messages and calls such as these defraud customers and limit access to goods and services? Yes.
I have an example of an elderly woman in Virginia who answered a pre-recorded call purporting to be from the Social Security Administration, that it had found drugs in a car associated with her, and that if she didn't pay a certain amount of money to take a certain number of steps, she would lose her Social Security. And as a result, she actually ended up losing hundreds of thousands of dollars of savings. I have many more examples. I don't know how much time you want me to take with them, but a lot of them are written up in our scam report that's on our website.
And Jeff, what I may do is, if we can get that report, we'll ask unanimous consent to submit that into the record as well, Ms. Saunders, just so that it's part of the record for this particular hearing. So thank you so very much.
Talk about a lot more impactful things. That's okay.
Supports the FTC and FCC clarifications of consent for safe calls. Earlier this year, as you said, Senator Markey had worked on some other issues, but Senator Markey and I had also led a letter to the FCC chairwoman asking the commission to update guidance along the lines of the FTC reinstating long-held requirements for unwanted telemarketing calls. Now, Mr. Berkeley, you also cited evidence that consumer consent for telemarketing is increasingly falsified. Automated bots and other artificial intelligence systems are using public data to consent on behalf of a consumer for calls they never asked for or do not want. How can industry, FTC, and
Generation industry do fraud? Here it comes. U.S. Senator talking about
limit the use of automated bots to falsify consent for robocalls?
How do we stop fraud? Rich, comment, and Nura.
I think on this issue, I think the courts and the guidance that's out there are pretty clear already. You need an actual consumer's consent, and if it's falsified, it's not consent. So I think those are clear, and if there's any ambiguity, happy to work with you and your staff on resolving that ambiguity, because consumers should only be in the calls they actually consented to.
I appreciate that very much. Ms. Fisher, the floor is yours for questions.
Thank you, Chairman Lujan. To begin with, I'd like to ask unanimous
John's actually asking, but that's okay.
And a letter from ACA International and the Credit Union National Association be made part of the hearing record.
Without objection.
Thank you. I agree with the chairman that this committee's focus on enforcement today is key. First and foremost, though, I think we need to ensure that our laws and rules that are on the books are being enforced to the fullest extent. Since 2020, the FCC has issued $700 million in forfeiture orders for TCPA violations. However, hardly any of these have been collected, mostly due to the Justice Department's failure to pursue these cases in court. In its obligations under the Trace Act, the DOJ also seems to have missed the opportunity to submit a report with meaningful recommendations. Ms. Brown, do you believe
expect to see a lot more action now?
The department is doing enough to ensure that bad actors carrying out illegal telemarketing and robocall schemes pay the penalties that the FCC assesses?
Thank you for the question. And in my written testimony, we explain, no, I don't believe the Department of Justice is doing enough. And you can sense that frustration from the FCC chairwoman. They certainly at the department have a lot of tools that they can use both to enforce FCC orders, but on their own to bring righteous mail fraud, wire fraud cases to enforce the laws that you all have passed. So yes, we believe the United States Department of Justice should do more. And as a former DOJ official, I think it is a missed opportunity for them.
So what can we as Congress do to make sure that they do enforce those rules? That, as you said, they have the tools. So how do we get them to use them?
Well, I think that one challenge is it's hard for Congress to direct the Department of Justice to take specific action due to separation of powers, but you have a lot of power to nudge, cajole, and shape expectations. And in my written testimony, we offer a few examples. In the Trace Act, for example, you impose some pretty robust reporting obligations on the Federal Communications Commission. We think similarly, you could impose those kinds of updates, mandates on DOJ to let you all know what they're doing. We also suggest that DOJ should prioritize funds for investigations and enforcement, and you all can direct some of that. And then requiring DOJ, for example, to establish a robocall enforcement and education office. Right now at the department, I think much of their robocall effort is housed under an elder justice initiative, and I think that's really important, obviously, but they can do more, and I think Congress can.
Since she knew that was coming. That was actually really good. It was very thoughtful.
You know, to me, the focus on enforcement really is two-pronged. We want to make sure that the government's going after the bad actors, and we want to avoid opening up legitimate actors to frivolous lawsuits. Abusive litigation against businesses acting in good faith does nothing to stop criminals. Ms. Brown, would you provide some examples of TCPA filings that you view as litigation abuse?
Certainly, thank you. And unfortunately, there are a lot, and I would commend to anyone's attention the work that the Chamber's Institute for Legal Reform has done. They've had several reports that give examples, but one example that stuck out to me recently, the city of Albuquerque was sued after sending text messages to local residents during the COVID-19 pandemic to notify them of the opportunity to participate in socially distanced town halls. And ultimately, Senator, I believe the city was able to get out of that lawsuit, but not after burdensome litigation. And that's just one example of many that seems to go after beneficial communications, or at least not the bad actors that I think we're here mostly to talk about.
The one TCPA case they pick on is the case against New Mexico City, Albuquerque, that was sending COVID-19 text. All right, it's one example.
In our states. And we want to make sure that rural Americans receive services, governmental services, but also services from private industry. And many of rural America is still connected with copper lines, and they are vulnerable when we look at these fraudulent schemes that are out there. Mr. Burke, what are the challenges that remain for these copper-based voice service network in terms of stopping illegal robocalls and their telemarketing schemes? And does this lack of fiber that we see in rural areas, does that have an outsized effort on most of our rural?
It's an interesting question. We're tying in.
Thank you. I think there are challenges. I know the industry is very committed to moving to IP, and that work is ongoing. Yes, when stir-shaking information can't be passed to the legacy networks, but what I would say is that the protections in place are helping all consumers. When we trace back calls, those calls are hitting people in New York, they're hitting people in rural America as well. And so when we get them off the network, that's helping everyone. Same with stir-shaking, it's helping infuse accountability that benefits everyone, whether they're getting their calls with stir-shaking.
Right. Good job, Josh. Way to handle that.
Thank you very much. Senator Markey, you recognize your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2019, I was proud to partner with Senator Thiel to introduce the Telephone Robocall Abuse Criminal Enforcement and Deterrence Act, the Trace Act, which directed the Federal Communications Commission to issue critical new rules to crack down on illegal robocalls. The Trace Act has helped stop some of the worst practices by robocallers, but robocalls remain a plague on our telephone system. My constituents in Massachusetts received over 623 million robocalls last year, nearly 20 robocalls per second. This year, Massachusetts residents are on pace to receive 800 million robocalls. Across the country, Americans are on pace to receive 54 billion robocalls this year. Some robocalls are lawful, but of course, the numbers of unlawful calls are astonishing. To each of the witnesses, starting with Ms. Saunders, do you agree that robocalls remain a serious problem for consumers? Yes or no?
Yes.
Ms. Brown?
You also got
Mr. Prickett?
Yes.
Robocalls. All robocalls.
Yes,
Are they a
absolutely.
problem?
Thank you. These fraudulent robocalls cost consumers tens of billions of dollars every year and undermine trust in the telephone system. That is a serious
Just
problem.
pivoting between robocalls, fraudulent robocalls, scam
One
calls.
particular element of the Traced
I have on a response to
the law
it's not a yes or no.
Right.
FCC
I don't know if
required
robocall
the telephone
probably
providers
said
adopt a
content
technical
is-
standard to verify that caller ID information was accurate. Senator Thune and I drafted this provision to stop bad actors from falsifying caller ID information, a practice known as spoofing. Robocallers often spoof calls to make the caller ID indicate that a call is coming from a local number. I'm pleased that the FCC has worked expeditiously to implement this provision, but I'm also deeply alarmed by the sheer number of fraudulent robocalls and scams. Robocallers seem to be changing their methods faster than we can adjust. Ms. Saunders, do you agree that the Traced Act has been helpful in reducing the number of spoof calls, but that robocallers have found ways to circumvent these rules?
Yes, sir, I do.
And Mr. Rudolph, do you agree with Ms. Saunders' assessment?
Absolutely. I know we see less spoof numbers than ever before. We see that the threat actors, especially those impersonating banks, getting real active phone numbers, and also jumping when a bank branch closes down, grabbing that number and then using that number to contact people.
It's unbelievable. Targeting robocallers is like an endless game of whack-a-mole, and so far the moles are winning.
Because you don't understand the problem, respectfully. If you understood the problem, the solution is pretty self-evident.
Have evaded the caller ID system by exploiting how phone numbers are distributed, then we may need to adapt our regulations.
Well, this is interesting. Maybe they'll limit the number of DIDs that
I
can
want to
be
say one
sold to
final
customers.
word about the FCC's robocall mitigation database. Every telephone provider must register with the database at the Federal Communications Commission. And companies that have not yet implemented the caller ID verification system must submit a plan for addressing illegal robocalls. Last week, the FCC took an important step to begin removing 20
Interesting.
non-compliant
Okay.
companies
They're following
from the
TCPAworld.com.
robocall
It's great.
mitigation database. Some of the companies' filings were laughable. Here's one. Here's one of the filings right here.
Blank page.
You see? It's a blank piece of paper. That is what they have submitted in terms
Well done.
of their
I mean,
compliance
it's a good point.
with the law. Another filing was a picture of the company's logo. Another provider submitted a document that said nothing in capital letters on receipt.
Wow.
That's actually
Wow.
pretty good. That's actually pretty good.
Nothing.
Get him, Senator Markey. Respect.
The FCC has
This guy's landed some blows. I like it.
proceedings against these obviously problematic filings. And I appreciate the ideas that Ms. Saunders has suggested to further strengthen the robocall mitigation database. I look forward to continuing to work with the Commission and my colleagues on this issue. It goes right to the heart of the issue that just drives every American crazy every single day. The unwanted robocalls coming into their lives all day long at the most inconvenient times, almost knowing that you're home and you're having dinner with your family to be the perfect time to get the whole family angry at these companies. So we thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing, and we just have to keep our focus on this issue. Thank you all so much for everything.
Senator Markey, thank you very much, and especially bringing attention to the filings. At the end of your testimony today, I'm reminded that some of those filings also include menus from restaurants. has been submitted as official documents as well. So thank you very much on bringing more and more attention to the enforcement side of this. Thank you very much, Senator, and your work on this. Senator Budd, you're recognized for comment.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you for the witnesses for being here today. When I talk to folks from North Carolina, they ask me about this topic a lot. They talk about robocalls and they express their frustrations. Some of them, they don't want to download the app that helps screen these things or pay a few extra dollars for that. So they're frustrated. They want some solutions. When I was in the U.S. House a year ago, I was proud to be an original co-sponsor of the Trace Act, which I think it's making a difference. According to UMail, scam robocall volumes have declined about 55% since their peak in October of 2019. Tools like the industry traceback group and deployed authentication technologies like Stir, Shaken, great name by the way, they better detect spoofing. They seem to be working. So I think we all still agree, however, that there's still a lot of work to do. So Mr. Berku, your written testimony noted that, quote, brand imposter calls.
They have no understanding. I know they're generalists. I know a senator has to know about all the laws.
Where someone claims to be calling from the IRS regarding back taxes or from the local power company on an overdue bill. These scams are particularly dangerous because they pretend to be communication from important institutions like government agencies, utilities, or from banks.
Is that area on the background?
Working with the industry traceback group, have
know
you
what she looks
identified
like.
any gaps in federal efforts to prevent illegal scam robocalls that make going after those foreign callers difficult?
Thank you. Yes, it is difficult because they feel they're not going to face justice because they're not based here. They use shell companies. They get kicked off the network and find a new one. So absolutely, we've been very effective in disrupting them. We've seen some of the impact, especially on the robocall side, that the scam volume is way down. But it's one of the reasons, I agree with my colleague here, Megan, that criminal enforcement against these individuals, these groups that's organized crime abroad doing this is absolutely critical because the only way they're going to stop trying to defraud Americans is they're taken off the board. So we think that's very important.
Thank you. So you mentioned the enforcement agencies. What could some of them do to improve the success rate of stopping these foreign-placed robocalls?
So I think criminal enforcement is key. When the few
Criminal
years
enforcement.
ago,
Gotcha. Second time you said it. He wants to see criminal
I
enforcement.
worked with the Central Bureau of Intelligence in India to raid some of these call centers. Government impersonation scams went down almost overnight. So that is key. It's really working with those
Raiding
partners
overseas call centers.
bringing people to
I love
justice,
it.
I think is
That's amazing. I love hearing that.
Ms. Brown, in your testimony, you discussed how the Department of Justice does not sufficiently prioritize prosecuting bad actors who break robocall laws in the attempt to defraud Americans. How does a lack of enforcement action influence efforts to shut down scams and make the cost of illegally robocalling significant enough to dissuade criminals?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think the lack of DOJ enforcement kind of shows that the FCC's efforts really run out of steam if the department's not there to sort of get them across the finish line to actually collect on some of those forfeitures. Similarly, there are open and notorious scammers that seem to me very clearly violating the wire fraud and the mail fraud statutes. And I think sending a message, as Josh was just saying, to whether it's to overseas scammers or...
So I like this part, right, where we're focusing on the real bad actors, the real scammers who are getting massive forfeiture orders, not being collected.
Taken a few actions.
It does send the message that, so what, you get hit with $100 million, $200 million fine, they're not going to collect it anyway, right?
Scams and the fraud that Margot discussed.
Thank you. So how would small businesses who themselves can be victims of these robocalls and illegal scam calls, how would these small businesses benefit from increased DOJ enforcement of the existing laws?
Well, let's talk about small business. There we go.
Sure. Great. I think they would benefit in the same ways that consumers would if they are being victimized and they don't have the resources to deploy sophisticated anti-fraud, then sending that message to take, as Josh said, some of these bad actors off the board, I think would be really, really helpful to them in much the same way that consumers are being defrauded.
Anyone else on helping small businesses?
First, I'd like to commend your Attorney General. North Carolina is one of the top leaders in robocall enforcement at the state level. I would say that small businesses, we have data that shows some of the threat actors understand that they've got deeper pockets, I suppose, as a targeted victim. So we are seeing a rise in specifically the robocalls and robotexts. They're trying to hit small business owners and convince them, to engage in their campaigns.
Thank you. My time's expired. Thank you, Senator. But Senator Tester, you're recognized for question.
I want to thank you for old Mr.
Small businesses suffer a lot more from lack of fees for TCPA lawsuits than anything else.
We got murderers, we got child molesters, we got rapists, we got drug peddlers, we got people who commit armed robbery, and then we got robocallers, okay? And it distresses me a lot when I hear that there's $700 million of fines that have been levied and no collections. Ms. Brown, were you with the U.S. Attorney's Office at one point in time in your career? Is that what I gathered?
I was at Main Justice at the Department of Justice.
Well, that's good enough. So, look, they got all this stuff. I know the U.S. Attorney in Montana, for example, is very, very busy running down people who are doing horrific crimes. By the way, I could make a claim that this is nearly as horrific as any of those ones I mentioned before.
This is amazing. John Tester, U.S. Senator from Montana.
I was on top of a combine this year.
Robocalls are
The phone's ringing.
equivalent
I'm
to
expecting a
child
call from my
molestation.
wife. I bust off the combine.
Wow.
Like, to the call. And the guy's asking me if I paid my loan for when I was in school. I haven't been in college.
I mean, if we just jump the shark, did we just jump the shark? Did we just have to jump the shark moment on robocalls, like live on TCPA?
Mr. Tester.
The question I have is, DOJ is levying these fines and none of it's been collected. There is an effort here in this body to defund the Department of Justice. Do they have enough people?
Wow.
For you?
Wow.
Well, having been at Main Justice, I know they have a lot of priorities. They have a lot of people.
It just got really political.
The department probably
He's blaming the Republicans for trying to defund the DOJ, and he's saying it's the Republicans' fault because the DOJ is not collecting on the fees.
Credit for passing these laws, but unless somebody drops the hammer on these clowns and makes them pay a price, puts them out of jail, or better yet, even puts them in jail, and I'd pay more taxes to put these people in jail, I think it's going to continue to happen. And it's going to happen. When I was in the state legislature, 20 years ago, we passed a do not call list. I've signed up for multiple do not call lists, and I get more calls
got some energy
than I
around
did
this.
back in 2003, for example, 20 years ago. So the question is does Congress need to do any more? Or is this all about enforcement? Go ahead.
It's a great question.
Ms. Saunders, I'll let you go.
It's a great question.
It's your turn.
Our main point in the testimony that I've submitted is that the incentives need to be changed, whatever way it's done.
Well, I understand if you hit somebody in their wallet, that kind of hurts.
Right. And what we've proposed,
I like the guy.
I was Senator Tester fan.
a methodology such as is permitted under the federal rules of civil procedure to get a temporary
And
restraint.
they have not done that yet.
No. So that once a particular voice service provider is found to be a repeat offender and to continue to process illegal calls after it's been notified previously, the FCC should suspend immediately its ability to.
Do the rest of the people on the panel agree with that perspective? Ms. Brown?
I haven't reviewed closely Ms. Saunders' proposal, but I've not sold that we need new authorities over at the FCC to do the kind of suspensions that she's talking about. I think they've got the.
But do you think those suspensions would be okay if they did them?
On the voice service side, I'm not sure exactly whether there'd be some unintended consequences there of what she's proposing, but they certainly can do more with their cease and desist.
That doesn't mean that you should be shut down.
I think when we're talking about fraud, one of the themes is the fraud actors change their behavior. They've moved from robocalls to more targeted calls, and some of the tools we've built for robocalls don't work as well for a live call. There's a big difference from I let someone on my network make.
But you know what? I very seldom get live calls. I get a call from a damn computer that sounds like a live person that then, if I stay on long enough, goes to a live person who I ask why not to get a real job because there's plenty of jobs out there in society.
Senator Tester is going to win re-election just based on his performance at this hearing.
So in that would be a pre-recorded call, but I still think enforcement against the fraudsters is really the key there, because they're going to keep adapting as the rules and the protections change. Doesn't mean we shouldn't keep adding more protections, but they will always keep working to try to get around them.
I got it. That's what a crook does. They look for and by the way, these are crooks. They look for the weakest link in the fence. So I came to this hearing, hoping that I would hear from some of you, and I did hear from Ms. Sanders Sherview, what we can do to stop, not to slow down.
Come ask me, Senator Tester.
But to
I've got you, buddy.
Folks.
I've got you.
Anybody have anything that Congress can do to stop them?
Over here, reach us.
I asked you a question yet, Mr. Rudolph.
You referenced you received a loan robocall, right?
Yeah, I've taxes, loan robocalls. And by the way, it's the same voice, the same computer, the same call, sometimes called from my neighbor's phone, by the way. So I don't know if that's illegal now or not.
Wow.
Offered his own phone number one time. I mean, this is crazy. This is crazy stuff that this country doesn't need in their economy. Keep going.
So your loan robocall, I would strongly suggest that's domestic originated, and that's an area that I would call the gray area telemarketing. So in this case, right now we track thousands of active campaigns per week, and current enforcement efforts are just working on the highest volume, prioritized campaigns. So your specific robocall, if you can get your state or you can get the FCC to put that on the priority list, that's one that we've got the tools and the techniques to diffuse. There's just not enough manpower to have a priority list that goes more than 10, 15 campaigns deep. So we can start working 50, 100 campaigns deep on a week-to-week basis. The FCC has showed effectively that the highest volume campaigns can be stopped.
What is he saying?
I don't understand
what he's saying. And Tester doesn't know what he's saying.
Out of state versus in country, out of country. I would love to know that information. Thank you all. This is a bunch of crap. I'll just tell you. We
What did you say?
Stop this. This is not good for
We stop this.
No, I think he said it's a bunch of crap. It's a bunch of
crap.
out there. Go get a damn job.
Thank you.
Oh, dude, I love that. Senator Tester, that was fantastic. I love the energy. I love the earnestness of his remarks. He obviously doesn't understand the problem either. He's actually looking for solutions. That panel had no solutions. Sorry, Josh, love you. That panel had no solutions. And he called them out. I respect that.
Materials that my staff prepared for me for this hearing, and just obviously experiencing this particular problem as a human being. I mean, my own mom just a couple of weeks ago sort of called me and gave me the quick hits of a particular scam that had been targeted at her, and it seems like we keep on tinkering around the edges here a little bit. We sort of do these little things, and maybe they slow it down, to Senator Tester's point. But we're fundamentally allowing crooks to prey on some of the most vulnerable people in our country, people who are living on fixed incomes and so forth. And I guess I'm just wondering, if we were willing to do something big, and this is one of the few things maybe that you could get bipartisan majorities in this House or this chamber to do, if we were to do something like really big here, what could actually stop this, right? So
how about a trade organization of marketers who commit themselves to the highest standards and won't buy fake leads and limit the number of outbound calls? I mean, how about that? How about that as a solution? Could that possibly help?
But then let's say
Senator J.D. Vance from Ohio, everybody Republican.
Something online, and they don't read the 75 pages of fine print, and one of those pages of fine print effectively signs their number up to be robocall.
Here you go. He's talking about transparency, stuff with reach, the reach standards. Here we go.
I'm just wondering, like, what can we actually do to stop this thing? I'm going to pick up where Senator Tester flipped off.
Dude.
Come on, guys.
Thank you, Senator.
ReachNBC.com.
I think one of the challenges here is the phone system by its nature is a series of interconnected networks. So the providers that are providing service to us, all they know is, like your mailman would know, what's the address, where's this going? They don't know what's inside the content. So that's the fundamental challenge. And what we do in Traceback, we trace back the illegal calls, and we hit 5, 6, 7, 8 providers that all touch it away and mixes them with legal traffic.
Just go ahead and mention Reach.
So
do it, Josh.
That's where
you.
What is big is criminal enforcement. It's the theme that I'm going to keep hitting here, because even if we stopped every single robocall, the criminals who do this, their day job is still defrauding Americans, and they'll just find a new version. So the only
well, that's not an excuse. Still stop robocalls even if they have a new channel. Come on, Josh. Reach.
People are actually in America versus how many of them are overseas.
So in our experience, it varies a little bit based on the type of call. So the pure fraud robocalls, the pure fraud phishing call, voice.
Here it is. Listen carefully.
Those are predominantly coming from overseas. The unsolicited telemarketing calls, those may originate here and be done by people here. But to what Megan said before, one of the reasons it's hard to collect fines against them is they pop up a new shell company, dissolve the old one, and are now doing new robocalls under a new name. And I do think there's some laws that might apply, and that might make that criminal as well.
And where are they coming from? The ones overseas? I mean, are they particular areas? You know, you sort of hear about Eastern Europe or Nigeria. Where are these things actually coming from?
A lot are from India. Some are from Dominican Republic. Some other countries as well. But India is a portion of the call.
India, it's not.
Is there any effort, sort of diplomatically, legally, to interface with some of the countries where this fraud is most common and actually use the extraordinary leverage the United States?
This guy's thinking.
Yeah.
This guy's thinking.
Folks to justice, or is there sort of an attitude like once it's in another country, it's such small ball things relative to other international crime, we don't focus on it. But of course, it's not small ball to the people who are affected by it.
There has been collaboration, and when there's collaboration, when our FBI works with the Central Bureau of Intelligence in India and raids these call centers, we see the impact. UMIL data will show just government imposter scams dropped immediately after those raids. So I think that's a testament to why we should keep prioritizing that, because it does work.
Okay. One final question here. We're actually going to an artificial intelligence briefing with some industry leaders later this afternoon. What could we do to help AI platforms and social media companies shield their data or tools from being used for more elaborate, family emergency scams, things like that?
Happy to work with you on that. I'm not sure what exactly could do on the social media side, but one thing I will say is that the TCPA right now makes illegal robocalls to cell phones, and robocalls are making calls with a pre-recorded or artificial voice. So I think that just one thing there is the TCPA, I do believe, applies.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I yield.
Thank you, Senator Van. Senator Klobuchar, you're...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A lot of questions here. I'll go fast. First of all, we know that after the
Senator Klobuchar from
2019,
Minnesota, Democrat.
After new FCC rules were in place, the number of scam robocalls declined by almost half. Now we're having all kinds of new issues. And Mr. Burku, you noted in your testimony that there is collaboration between industry and the FCC. How can we make sure that tracing illegal calls to their origin results in actual enforcement action?
So I think what we've seen, the FCC's approach with the cease and desist, I think it's been highly effective. They've targeted certain campaigns. They dropped off the face of the earth. So I think we're making that progress. I think the more the FCC, your provider, I think it's a process, and over time that is going to keep
they're trying to find the guys. Right. Like the FBI, it's like asking the police, what should the DA do to be more effective?
Particularly these telemarketing calls, that these volumes are so high. I was just looking, we've got so many people, 221 million numbers registered on the do not call list. And still we're seeing a number of people call about violations. What solution should we prioritize here?
So first, let me say that I believe that the number of scam calls that have appeared to be reduced because there's been a reorganization or a recategorization of many of those calls. Many of the calls that had previously been identified as scams have now been identified as telemarketing calls. And as Mr. Brooks said, the telemarketing calls originate in the United States. We think that what needs to be done is the FCC should adopt a quick-acting, temporary restraining order type of methodology. And once a voice service provider is found to have repeatedly, after notice,
more pressure on the voice
telemarketing calls, they should be suspended immediately from the
suspending carrier operation
database. That'll cost them money. And even if they have
5 years ago, any traffic, common carriers, no matter what.
Right.
Now, Margaret Saunders is on Congress. The carrier should be shut down.
Senator Gates mentioned this. I had someone I know that got one of these calls. His son, serving in the Marines, deployed. So they knew he was deployed, didn't know where. They get a call because they'd scraped his voice off the internet, asking for money to be delivered to somewhere in Texas. I've had 2 other military families tell me this story in Minnesota. I don't.
Sometimes lots of stories about scams.
So what are service providers, Mr. Burton, what are they doing to get ahead of these robocalls, using voice calling? These are obviously targeted ones with the person's voice, but all kinds of things could happen. And what can we do, Mr. Rudolph, to mitigate this?
Thank you. The voice service providers take protecting their customers very seriously. They are always looking at the greatest technology. They've implemented blocking and labeling. They have analytics running on their network. So I think they will continue to try to find out how they can identify those scams and how they can take action accordingly. One of the things with our traceback effort, whether it's a robocall or one of those calls, we can trace those back. We can find out who's making them. We can find out who put it on the network. So I think traceback will be a really important part of stopping those going forward as well.
Your specific use case is a targeted attack, and based on the investigations that we've done so far and did similar attacks, those are threat actors who have gotten a personal phone and a personal phone number, just like anybody going into a store to get a device. So those are extremely hard for a communication provider to deal with. It looks just like a customer making those phone calls. Yeah.
I'm just using it as an example. Then it could get worse, right?
Absolutely.
To the voice of general in that they know.
I mean, if it seems like nobody on the panel has any solutions to offer, it's because that's exactly what's happening. It's very challenging. It really just comes down to the quality of witnesses, the quality of information that Congress is receiving. And they're not looking for 360-degree solutions. They're getting very superficial responses. They're just talking to the wrong people. It's as simple as that.
And these texts often include links that install malware, and spyware on a consumer's device. In March, the FCC adopted rules. Ms. Saunders, what other measures should they consider to go at these illegal robo-texts?
We have recommended to the Commission that it adopt special security rules for robotexts that include URLs, just because of this significant.
So now we're talking about the PLRM.
Pass regulations or statutes that provided more protection.
Maybe this is something that's got to be looked at.
They're stolen from their bank accounts. There are that would be a big help as well.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ironically, private site campaigns are going to result in more of these text messages if the NPRM goes further with the NCLC wants.
Thank you very much. I mean, you're hearing the incredible frustration all of us have. You heard Senator Nance, Senator Tester, Senator Klobuchar. I mean, it's really driving our constituents crazy. Vermont, we had 3.5 million robocalls just last month. It's like
Senator Welch, Democrat from Vermont.
Per Vermonter, and it's really unsettling, especially to older people who think they may be getting a call from a grandchild or a son or a
So you're hearing these repeated remarks from senators, kind of level setting out of the gate, talking about scams.
You know you're trying to do stuff, but it's not working. It's not working the way it needs to. You know, I joined Senator Lujan and Senator Markey in asking the FCC to align its do not call registry guidelines with those of the FTC.
So here's Senator Welch is also now talking about, guys, asking the FCC to align with the FTC and finding you cannot sell consent. Okay, so really, you guys in the new generation space, you should be listening to this.
And what
if you buy these, you should be listening to this. We're talking about U.S. senators trying to shut down this industry
and better protect consumers from robocalls.
Thank you for the question, Senator. We have been pushing the FCC for months now to simply reiterate that the language in its current regulations mean what it says. And instead, the FCC...
It's not what it says, Margo. That's not what it says. Okay, you're misreading the statute.
From the current regulations. And we've been very afraid of this. So actually...
Why is that? Why are they doing that?
I'm not sure whether it's a misunderstanding or whether the lead generators and the sellers who are benefiting from these telemarketing calls have gotten to them, frankly. But the proposed regulation or anything like it is very dangerous. The FCC issued regulations 20 years ago explicitly requiring that every
it's not explicit. You are literally lying to Congress. You are lying to Congress, Margo Saunders. You are literally lying to Congress right now.
That caller
I'd like to see a prosecution.
calls to that consumer. And the proposed regulations would allow more calls per consent, would not require...
No wonder this is baffling to the senators, because Margo is lying to them, misrepresenting what the content of the reg says.
Say that if you can encourage...
Can you imagine that? Someone just like misrepresenting to a U.S. senator?
It'd be nice if the senator actually read the content themselves.
Question for Mr. Rudolph. It's about generative AI, and there's some argument that could help actually push back on the scammers, but it also obviously is a tool that is going to be used by scammers, especially generating a familiar voice. Can you tell me how the evolving landscape for generative AI impact the ongoing efforts to combat fraudulent communications and protect consumers?
First, I'd like to recognize your state as well. There's robocall platforms and robocall operations that refuse to call Vermont. That state's too hot to call. So your constituents benefit from your attorney general's work, attorneys general's work in that regard. On the topic of generative AI, clearly threat actors have flocked to it.
Why are they asking email about generative AI?
Generative AI doesn't have ethics or questions about what it's doing as it's effective.
How about the question of email? Are you detecting generative AI in your campaigns at all?
The other side defending against.
They don't understand. They don't understand that their witnesses
I don't know. They're just like lobbying random questions.
And they're going in order.
Recall mitigation plan.
This is so frustrating. This is the way the U.S. government works.
Rip through recall mitigation database.
Decent but underqualified witnesses with superficial responses being asked questions they're not qualified to answer because people asking the questions don't know who they're talking to.
I'm getting zero value out of this.
You can apply that
Dare I say it out loud?
And probably discard half the entries in that database in an afternoon or a week of work.
All right, Ms. Saunders, again, thank you. The stir and shake, and I want to go through it, but how can the FCC incentivize providers to use the available tools to block calls?
I think the FCC has done a very good job at implementing stir shaken, and the problem with stir shaken is not the particular technology, it's the fact that there's this whole other method for robocallers to use borrowed numbers, rotating numbers, or as Mr.
No shooting and carouseling, folks. If you've got a large volume of VIPs and you're cycling through them, this is what Margo Saunders is telling Congress you should not be doing.
Robocallers to use the numbering resources or misuse them in this way completely undermines the whole purpose of stir shaken. So I think now it's time for the FCC to drill down on the numbering resources misuse.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Welch. Senator Hickenlooper, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr.
It's amazing how many senators are asking questions on this bill.
What a fascinating
issue that look at some of the issues around the world, that this seems relatively small, and yet when you talk to constituents
Who's this?
in our states, we see this is
Senator Hickenlooper,
something that drives people.
Senator from Democrat, Senator from Colorado, another Democrat.
Ms. Saunders, a number of cybersecurity experts have raised the issue of some companies functioning as consent farms. They're
here we go.
Essentially tricking
consent farms
consumers into, they may be browsing a website, but they're
Look, you're not wrong about this. Consent farms are the problem. So we said in our opening remarks, the lead generators have brought the wolves to their door with their abusive conduct.
I can't imagine.
This is a problem.
Whether people actually intentionally would do that, I guess they must. Anyway, the FTC's launched investigations into companies who are behaviorally acting as consent farms.
Wouldn't it be nice that you have actually somebody else on the other side of Margo that respond to business on the panel, since Margo is absorbing all these questions about lead generators and no one is there to rebut, right?
I know, guys.
Sufficient.
I know. Because what I'm doing right now.
Protections for consumers who obviously.
I think more people watch TCPA World than they do this hearing anyway.
Can we send this recording to the site?
Disclosures are unfortunately uniformly ineffective at protecting.
Here we go, Margo.
I
Reach,
think
the
the
reach
problem
standard.
needs to be that the rules need to be
No, I
sufficiently
understand what you're
clear that the sellers who are using the telemarketers to make these calls and benefiting from these calls will be much more careful which callers they employ to make the calls. Because if they're not careful, they will be zinged with a TCPA.
That's what's currently happening right now. That's today.
Unfortunately, although I understand the frustration of the Chamber of Commerce with inappropriate class actions, at the moment, the danger of class actions is also one of the prime ways that incentivizes sellers and callers to comply with the law. So we want the law to be clear, and we want the law to create those incentives to comply with it.
Right. And Mr. Rudolph, I would ask you, just and this is off, my staff will chide me later, but I'm curious. It seems like there's a market there. This is so frustrating to people that for a relatively low monthly cost, lots of people I think would buy protection. In other words, does generative AI have the potential to really effectively protect people from these kinds of scammers?
Going back to the question you just asked a year ago, I want to really reinforce the robocall operator who can use tens of thousands or millions of numbers to contact you. If you think about what we can do in a device, it's very easy to block an individual number. And whether it's not actually officially signaling to that company, hey, taking my consent back, but by blocking a single number, you're preventing it from communicating with you. If we could require companies, when you grant consent, to say, I'm granting consent to that one number, right? And if a bot granted it, accidentally, unintentionally granted,
just
one number, you can control that call originating from that one number and revoke that consent. So if we can just change.
Can you imagine? I consent to 1-800.
Got an entity and how many numbers it tries to rotate through to evade these tools that we have in our hand. You don't need generative AI. You just need to make sure that you pin robo operations, robo communications, using a number which uses their identity as they communicate that with you.
Great. Ms. Brown, in your testimony, you described how businesses use automated messages to reach their customers. So when these bad actors flood an individual with robocalls, people lose their trust in answering the phone. The best example I always I have my phone. If I were to call you, comes
another example.
It doesn't give my number because whether for whatever right or wrong reason, sometimes, rarely, a constituent or a journalist might decide they want to get a hold of me frequently. So I have caller ID blocked. No one will take my call, so I have to send someone a text before they'll take my call because they think that is always going to be a robocall. Whereas now the robo guys are so smart that they never use it anymore. I keep trying to convince even my family that they should accept blocked numbers when they don't. Anyway, Ms. Brown, how would you think small businesses would benefit if we could reduce the volume of illegal or unwanted calls?
We already heard this question.
I think small businesses are victimized by fraudulent and illegal calls in much the same way.
Everyone benefits from contact rates going up. You can trust the call receiving it.
The steps Congress has taken to prevent caller ID spoofing, to try and clean up the ecosystem, and some of the work that Josh
start answering all the questions.
It's really important to try to instill or protect confidence in the calling ecosystem, so people do want to pick up their phones. Small businesses both make calls and receive calls, and I think everyone is benefited if there can be trust that who's calling you is who it purports to be, and not an overseas scammer.
Which is small businesses.
Irate because they have to take every call, and so they are the ones that are constantly.
Small businesses, a theme around small businesses being damaged by the proposal to take away lead generators.
Taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. I yield back to you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Senator Hickenlooper. Senator Rosen, you're recognized. Senator Rosen, we cannot hear you right now.
Oh, lock mute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Senator. The floor is yours.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. All right. Technology is
Senator.
great when it works, and sometimes technology is not so great when it gives you a million phone calls all at once. So there you go. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. And I'm going to just get right into it on scams, of course, in Nevada, because according to the FTC, in 2022 alone, Nevada had the third highest rate of fraud and the fifth highest rate of identity theft. So every year, millions of Americans, of course we know, including many of my constituents, fall victim to these predatory robocallers. These scammers, they create elaborate schemes through robocalls. They say they're calling from government agencies or other entities, attempting really just to convince people to provide their personal identifiable information or that they're legitimate. And so, for example, Nathan is one of my constituents in Las Vegas. He's a veteran of the Air Force, of the U.S. Air Force. He wrote to my office sharing about a spam call he received from the Veterans Benefit Center. They asked him to refinance his mortgage.
Read something
that 15 calls a day from the Veterans Benefit Center. Hopefully, Nathan recognized the scam. Many others don't. And veterans like him who serve our country should not be targeted with these kinds of calls. It's unacceptable. We have to do more to protect all of our
people in the military should not be targeted by robocall.
So, Ms. Saunders, what advice would you give to Nevadans and, of course, to everyone, particularly in more vulnerable communities, perhaps like seniors and veterans who are targeted by scammers and are impacted at, I would say, disproportionate rates?
Thank you for the question. We have one clear piece of advice to give all American subscribers until this problem has been solved.
This will be interesting.
If you receive a call from anybody, unless you are absolutely positive you know the person that has called you, do not give access to your bank account or any other money to that caller. If you receive a call from somebody purporting to be from the Veterans Administration and you want to make sure that your benefits are protected, then hang up, look up the number for the Veterans Administration or whoever it is that supposedly called you and call them directly. But don't give money.
Decent advice.
Even when we
Decent advice. It is an issue. Right? People are receiving scam calls.
We never ever give over the phone payment information.
Yeah, that's great advice, and we're going to have to keep putting it out there over and over again so people continue to hear this message. But Mr. Berkhu, can you tell us a little bit about how companies are working together to ensure that people are aware of these scams? We have to get it out there again over and over to keep reminding people.
So, Josh.
Scams like the one that Nathan called us about. What are you doing to make sure your advocacy is reaching every corner of every state, urban,
TCPA.
Thank you for the question. The industry is very active educating their consumers and their customers. I think they all have information out there. But one of the other things is all voice service providers virtually today have protections in place too. They not only stir shaking, which we talked about, but all the major wireless carriers have blocking and labeling. So there's actually a lot of work to directly protect their customers as well.
Thank you. And speaking about customers, and now you're talking about your workforce who's creating all these ways to protect consumers. Workforce and technology, it's so important. You know, as a former computer programmer, I have a unique understanding of both the benefits and challenges that technology presents. So in this case, we have this great technology, but it allows for more sophisticated use of robocalls or robotexts. And hopefully on the same side,
But we're going to stay with you here on TCPAworld.com.
That. So, Ms. Brown, law enforcement officers, they really need access to training and technology to talk about the more advanced scams, especially as we see AI start to play a role in these scam robocalls. And so based on your experience, what kind of technology and training do you think Congress can support to bolster these resources as these scams just get more and more vicious, I would say?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I haven't given a lot
It's
of
an amazing question, but I mean, yeah.
Wrong
Ms. Brown is just not qualified to answer that question. No disrespect.
that collaborative work that the state attorneys general are already doing with the Federal Communications Commission and otherwise. So my perception is there are a lot of resources that are available, some of which are similar to what Ms. Saunders was talking about. And
Basically, all the resources out there. Okay. Specific question: what can Congress do? Answer: there's already resources, right? There's a complete disconnect between what the senators are driving at and what answers they're receiving.
Attorneys general have been very active on these issues, and I think they are uniquely positioned to help state and local law enforcement identify some of these more exotic, shall we say, scam attempts that my panelists were discussing. So I think it's a great area to think about, particularly if you have constituents who it sounds like may not be getting that kind of information and support.
No, especially as we deal with deep fakes and other things. And of course, we're just going to keep working on building on our STEM workforce and keep working to protect the consumers. Mr. Chairman, thank you for this hearing. I yield back.
Senator Rosen, thank you so very much. I'm going to recognize myself for some additional questions. Mr. Rudolph, everyone is talking about AI at some degree and using it differently. Just yesterday, the chairwoman of the FCC,
with the AI questions.
It's just crazy.
That would take a closer look at how artificial intelligence impacts illegal and unwanted robocalls and texts. Specifically, this would investigate how the commission might use AI technologies to protect consumers under the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. Now, UML specializes in stopping scam calls and texts, so thank you for that. How do you envision using artificial intelligence to protect consumers from robocalls and robotexts?
It's a great question. Thank you. I'd almost make a joke that we're going to enter a Black Mirror episode, and each of us will be protected by our own bot that's going to screen every inbound communication. And eventually we've got just all these telemarketing bots talking to all these consumer protection bots, and the polarized caps melting for all the GPUs having to run that. But that joke aside, one of the suggestions I had earlier was to use a large language model to go through robocall mitigation database filings and toss out all the ones that are junk. So LLMs can be trained pretty quickly to synthesize that data and understand the intent and what that robocall mitigation filing would.
LLM do that, by the way. It's like an OCR program. I mean, you don't even have to use AI or generate other ways to get that done.
The Herculean lift of enforcement. The same thing could be done where if you wanted to investigate a communication service provider and you were given logs from that provider or given internal communications or memos that discuss the policies or controls those providers implemented, an LLM can quickly process that data and come to an understanding of what was actually happening. So I would say we're really facing a problem of scaling enforcement labor to make industry compliant here, and that's a great place to deploy that technology.
Shouldn't they be selling from the DOJ saying those words, right?
Also bringing attention to the line of questioning from Senator Markey around how so many are thumbing their nose at a requirement with the mitigation plan and submitting blank documents, documents that are intended to be rude or menus or whatever nonsense is also being submitted. It shows that it's not working, that there's a loophole somewhere that's been created, that there's no attention to the prosecution side, if you will, or the requirements from a mitigation plan. And using tools to identify where those are is going to be critically important to ensure that we're able to enforce the mitigation plan when someone is found to be doing this illegal activity. I also appreciate, Ms. Saunders, your response to several colleagues' questions about what could be done in the area of looking at where traffic is being carried. Data that I've seen suggests that not all carriers may be knowingly doing this, but it seems to be that there's a smaller number of carriers that carry more of the calls. That's revenue. If someone is told you're carrying these these calls that are stealing billions of dollars from American people, and they do it over and over, and then they submit a mitigation plan that is a blank document. It's the cost of doing business. Want to
Yeah, so there's this assumption that there are carriers out there that are repeatedly using, allowing illegal people to get on their networks. That might have been true a couple of years ago. It's just increasingly not true with the efforts of the ITG. You heard Josh earlier say 80% of these are mitigated immediately upon contact. And that is, I mean, the majority of the voice service providers in this country are taking robocall mitigation very seriously. We're looking for edge cases, but I just, saying repeat offender is just not effective here.
Commerce Committee had a hearing on rail derailment. Well-intentioned legislation, well-intentioned testimony, people working together. But when the rulemaking gets started, then there's all kinds of stuff submitted into the Federal Registry. A lot of them are loopholes that get codified into the rules, creating loopholes. Loopholes can lead to problems, as well-intentioned as they may be for submitting.
We're talking about lead generators, guys.
We can peel back the curtains on this to stop this. With the transition to telecommunications being digital, it's not analog. Mr. Berkeley, you can trace the stuff back wherever it goes.
I mean, that transition took place 50 years ago.
Because you know where it's coming from. It's digital. You can follow it. So why is this so hard?
I'll answer.
If the traffic is in a small area, let's work with them. Either to create the technical capabilities for the small carriers to have those capabilities, but for the whole industry also to self-police to say, you're the problem, you need to stop this. Because if a small carrier has an agreement with one of the major carriers in America and they're knowingly doing this,
like, this is so basic, it's so superficial. The lack of understanding is so apparent. It's just remarkable.
And I'm hoping that we can get there. So I appreciate that line of questioning, those responses. I'll close with this particular question towards you, Ms. Saunders, around AI-generated scam calls. Now, we also know there's an urgent need to mitigate risks and establish responsible guardrails around AI. And we've seen many examples around here. Scammers are cloning children's voices. We heard the testimony from our colleagues with veterans or active military whose voices are being spoofed, all to steal financial resources from families. Now, Ms. Saunders, yes or no, do current laws and regulations around robocalls cover these types of AI-generated scam calls?
Yes.
The Telephone Consumer Protection Act has been found to cover robot-generated scam calls and telemarketing calls.
Say yes.
Would anyone else respond to that? Ms. Brown?
I think that you as the TCPA is well suited to adapt to that sort of new technology, and I was just going to commend to you for that you put out on a bipartisan basis.
Come on, Ms. Brown.
There's a lot to learn from the NOI that the chairwoman of the FCC has kicked off about how all of this will play out. But I do think the TCPA reaches some of these voice cloned concerns.
Some of these voice
I concur.
Mr. Rudolph.
I think anybody who's doing voice cloning to make calls doesn't care about the TCPA, so they're committing criminal acts, and TCPA, they would ignore it.
I appreciate that. Ms. Saunders?
The problem is that the TCPA is not effective against scam calls. It's effective against telemarketing calls, but it's not effective against scam calls. And the only way to scam calls,
you've agreed with her twice now.
Providers who are providing access to the communications network for those scammers. And we don't have a law like the TCPA that applies to the voice service providers, nor are we necessarily recommending that there be one. So Ms. Brown, you don't need to worry. But what we are recommending is that the FCC be...
The FCC shuts down the carriers with no law. Thank you, Margot. That's very helpful.
problem voice service providers that are inserting the bad calls into the network.
I appreciate
That is
that.
so
I'm concerned.
But she doesn't use her powers for good.
Mhm.
It handles calls in one format, but I'm concerned in this other space as well. And look, understandably, when it was written, this technology did not exist to the degree that it exists today. One of the faults with many pieces of legislation is when it's thought up, and by the time it passes, technology has accelerated, a generation or two ahead of what the well-intentioned proposal was as well. But that's where the rule-making bodies are supposed to keep up with what's happening here, and also industry. When something's
Senator, you're supposed to update the law as Congress. You can't delegate authority to a regulator to keep something up to date.
That should rise to any prosecutor's attention. If the Department of Justice is not going to do this, then how do we find other partners that are willing to? How do you work with the FCC such that if a fine is put forth and then there's not prosecution, then what? And I'll also say that if there's a small number of entities that are responsible for the majority of traffic and they've been warned about it and it continues, something needs to be done there. Because again, it's the cost of business, it's revenue. And if you can make $100 million and pay a $10 million fine, some people are willing to take that deal. And it's just not right, because who's at the end of this? Ms. Saunders, do you have some thoughts on what Congress could be doing to protect Americans from AI-generated scam calls and robocalls?
42 minutes over time, and we're still going, and that's okay. We're here for you, TCPA World.
Should probably check if it calls.
I think that I've articulated it already. I think that the FCC is uniquely poised to be the prime policeman on the block regarding the voice service providers. What I want to explain is that the reason the terminating providers, who are all in agreement that these calls should not be processed, the reason they cannot stop them, they can't block them, is because the scam calls are mixed with the legal calls. So it's impossible for the terminating providers to identify them.
But Ms. Saunders, if I may interject, I'm a former public utility commissioner. So while the calls may be mixed in, they can tell where the calls are originating, and then they also know if the investigators are doing their job, you're bearing this traffic from, Mr. John in whatever location is, whether it's in the United States or another part of the world. Why are you carrying all this traffic where it appears that 90% of it is the bad stuff as well?
Well, I'm not sure that the terminating providers can always identify exactly where the calls are originating. All they see is that the calls are coming from the upstream intermediate provider. And so the key is to somehow encourage all of the providers in the network to only carry legal calls, or else it will cost them. And we've provided in our testimony in the last section an example of how the legal callers can use their power in the marketplace to encourage their voice service providers to only carry their calls and thus isolate the illegal calls, which we think would enable the terminating providers to better identify them.
White labeling with the carrier so that their traffic goes through and nobody else's on third-party leaves. We have that solution built in. Margo should be supportive of that.
So that's what our traceback process accomplishes, because as Ms. Saunders said, often all provider knows is who they got from, and our process does that. We just go hop by hop by hop. Who'd you get the call from? Who'd you get the call from? Until we find out exactly where it came from.
That's proprietary technology?
We have a portal that all the providers.
The industry traceback group does. Lord.
Shamed for not responding in time. They get warnings. The provider downstream gets shamed if they continue to robocalls. All this information is made available to the enforcement.
Repeat that last part, Mr. Berku. What happens if they take calls from folks that are responsible for robocalls, or where they're known to come from?
So the way we've designed our system, if a provider's upstream is the originator of the illegal robocalls we trace, the downstream provider knows that. They are put on notice that their upstream partner keeps giving them bad traffic. And again, all of this information makes its way to the enforcement community.
So based on that common carrier whatever the agreement is between one carrier and another, your technology allows for those two entities to know that there's a problem with these fraudulent calls.
Yeah, absolutely. We see, to Ms. Saunders' point, we see all the time carriers taking action. We see them fire their wholesale providers. The challenge is, because it's an interconnected network, is I've heard from providers that said, okay, we got too much bad traffic from these providers and fired all of them. Calls still hit their network. It just was another hop or two that were added in between.
And Mr. Rudolph, with that being said,
everyone's pointing out that the sun is too low.
Who is doing that?
Can stop this from hitting a consumer, dramatically reduce stop to protect people. Is UMail able to identify where it originates?
So as calls reach the consumer, right, we've got two very amazing ways to understand which communication providers were the originators, the gateway providers for those. Traceback, if the call was not attested using STIR/SHAKEN, and if it has a STIR/SHAKEN packet basically with it, it's clear as day that these are the 7 voice providers that are currently harboring that account. That's making the loan calls, identifying as the VA or interrupting the other senator's hike. So, if you ask me right now, who are the providers who have these calls, we can look at STIR/SHAKEN and get a lot of that. And then the ones we don't see the STIR/SHAKEN yet carried, the traceback process can illuminate that. What we are missing is the signal to industry. Those specific calls are bad, knock those off, right? The FCC's done that twice, auto warranty calls and student loan calls. And now providers have a clear signal from the FCC, don't carry those. And what happens is traceback runs, or UMail will directly contact the provider and say, hey, this call looks like it's committing fraud, maybe you should knock it off. That account gets kicked off that provider and goes and finds a new home. So unless the entire ecosystem is notified, don't take this account on, someone's going to look at that new sign up and think, oh, that's revenue. I'm going to take that new account on, and kind of look the other way about whatever that account might be communicating.
What process is required to ensure the whole ecosystem knows about the one fraudulent call and the communication to the one company?
Oh, that's a good question.
Again, sorry.
What would be required to share that information that UMail may be having with one carrier, or anyone may be having with one carrier, to say this call's fraudulent, you should probably kick it off, so that it goes across the entire ecosystem?
So we work regularly every other week with the FCC, and we go through the prioritized calls that are on that hot list of investigations, and we'll provide that in those discussions about, hey, these are the providers that we are seeing that are carrying those calls presently.
Appreciate that. Ms. Brown.
Do you want me to address AI, which I think is what you started with a little while ago?
In the space with AI, also given the responses associated with being able to narrow where there may be a fraudulent call with the carrier, is there something that could be done to share it within the ecosystem? Is it something that the companies could adopt to share through that process? Is it something the FCC should be doing with existing authorities? That this is what's going to happen every time that we see this, and it's proven that there's a fraudulent call. If you could touch on those 3 areas.
Sure, I will do my best. Thank you, Senator. I'm actually sort of optimistic, and I think the chamber would be, that AI will sort of juice up what the ITG and UMail are already doing. And I think, so that gives me optimism that those anti-fraud efforts and the ability to detect bad traffic is going to get better over time. And I think at a recent workshop the FCC held back in September with the National Science Foundation, they heard about that as well. So that's kind of my response on the AI piece of this, or the AI approach. It sounded to me, from what Mr. Rudolph and Mr. Berku were saying, that the FCC is intimately involved in getting this information. I think it's maybe a question of scale to address the issue that you were raising. Again, maybe AI, maybe some additional technology can help there. I don't have visibility whether it's a manual process or if it's really phone calls with the Enforcement Bureau, which it probably is, which makes me sad for the Enforcement Bureau staff. But again, I think there's a reason to be sort of cautiously optimistic that maybe they haven't cracked the code, but there can be additional steps. And then if the FCC can be encouraged to do more of what it did in the auto warranty space and the student loan space, I think the report the FCC gave to Congress under the Trace Act had some really remarkable data in it about the decrease in calls after they took those actions. So I'm sort of cautiously optimistic about that process working. I don't see right now a need for new regulatory authorities to be given, because it feels like that process is actually working fairly well, even if it's a little opaque. Sorry for that long answer.
No, I appreciate the response very much. Thank you all for being here today, and to all my colleagues for attending today. This is important testimony, and there's, as you all know, an immense interest with the American people in this space, an immense frustration with the American people about what happens to them every minute of every day as well. And
right. I want to wrap it up here. So we're going to spend about 10 minutes after the hearing analyzing this and doing some additional breakdown. I'm just going to wait for this to end, see if there's going to be any more testimony here.
I understand where and what is happening every day, looking at the ability of rules that exist, exploring those that may be needed to make things better in the space. So thank you so very much. And a remaining challenge and a very complex issue. With that, I will close the hearing, and should members have additional questions for the witnesses for the record, I ask that they submit them to the committee within 2 weeks, and witnesses will have an additional 2 weeks to respond. Thank you, everybody.
All right, so that's it. We're off the record here. We're going to spend about 10 minutes kind of breaking down what we heard. This is the Czar, of course, and Sunface over here. Puja, you could have been like blocking the sun so people can actually see what you look like.
It's uncomfortable that way.
Well, comfort is what matters most. Wow, we heard a lot here today. I got a few takeaways that Puja, I know you have a few takeaways too. First, I just was incredibly frustrated listening to that. The panel of witnesses, they have knowledge, right? These are not ill-qualified people to testify, but the testimony they gave was incredibly superficial. There was very little in the way of solutions that were being offered. The questions of the U.S. senators, by and large, were not directly responded to, and were, frankly, it was a very ill fit. Questions were being asked to witnesses who were not qualified to answer those questions. And it was just very frustrating for me sitting here looking at these senators, essentially with an understanding of like a fifth grader, right? Like, they have opinions, they have views, they know this has to be stopped. They're feeling around in the dark. If you have this debate in like a fifth grade class, I think you'd get about as much out of it as we just got out of a U.S. Senate hearing. And that's incredibly frustrating because, of course, there are actual experts out there that really know what they're talking about. And, you're listening to one right now. So, look, kind of breaking down the various issues, there is obviously a problem with identifying fraudulent traffic in real time. Senator Lujan at the end, closing the hearing, seemed to keep implying that U.S. Telecom had the ability to do that, but it can't be done, at least not currently. Could there be some sort of adaptation where a barrier with a bot that's like listening in somehow to communications or can identify the source, in real time? I don't know. Maybe, but we're decades away from that. And if someone has a solution along that line, it seems to be what the senators were kind of grappling with. That's not been proposed. No one's working with that. But setting that aside, I want to talk about a couple of things, and then Puja, I want you to weigh in here too. First, Margot Saunders, you heard it, folks. You heard it. She told the U.S. senators that she wants to shut down the business model of the lead generators. She said that. Shut down the business model. And what really frustrated me, you heard me say it, was she lied to Congress. Just flat lied. Margot Saunders lied to Congress, folks. It happened. And I'm not going to back away from those words because it occurred. She told Congress that the regulations were clear and that they absolutely do not allow for there to be intermediaries, right, for the transfer of consent. And that is just not true. So you saw, Senator Markey at the time was flummoxed. So how is this happening? Well, it's happening because it's not as Margot says. The truth is the CFR does not say that consent has to be provided directly between the consumer and the seller. That word directly is not in there. You can't pretend that it is. It's just not there. So this is, in fact, right, what has enabled, of course, the lead generation industry to thrive and consumers to benefit to some degree, but also, of course, again, I keep saying it, the abuse of the lead generation industry, the failure to self-regulate, the failure to set standards, has led us to where we are now, where the U.S. senators are very, very frustrated with this industry. And Margot can correctly say, and you heard Josh from U.S. Telecom can correctly say that fraudulent leads are a massive problem. But the problem really is that no one seems to have the solution to this issue other than reach, right? Like we have literally solved this problem. All we need is widespread adaptation of our standards, of the fraud mitigation requirements, of the transparent consumer disclosure requirements. We literally are solving 1 billion calls a month. Now, all we need is adaptation, and yet no one is talking about this but us. There's like literally, there's nothing more frustrating for me in the world than to have solved the problem and then see a U.S. Senate hearing with a bunch of people that fail to discuss the solution that we've literally created, crafted, and handed to them. But that was very frustrating for me. Definitely more frustrating than I was expecting. I really did not enjoy this hearing as much as that. I thought it was going to be fun. I thhat it was going to be enjoyable. I thought I might learn a thing or two. I really didn't, unfortunately. All right, so we'll have some other stuff. We'll have more coverage of this. But Puja, what did you think?
I mean, quite frankly, I was frustrated and bored a little bit. It was a conversation amongst the witnesses in the Senate just to complain about an issue that we're already well aware of. There was zero solutions presented. There was zero conversations about the good actors or any of the good actors, right? There was a little bit of conversation about small businesses, how we can help small businesses, but how about the benefits consumers receive from having options from these good American businesses? Or how about the good lead generators that are providing the options consumers actually want? You're talking about digital marketing, but no one emphasized the fact that consumers actually appreciate digital marketing these days, right? Everyone's on their phones, everyone's on the internet. People don't like to pick up calls. People don't like to go into retail shops. Most consumers prefer to be online. And there was zero conversations about the consumer's preference on, using these options in order to meet their needs as a consumer and making life easier. Sure enough, robocalls do harm consumers. We heard plenty of examples from each senator. Each senator had some woe is me, story.
Which is legitimate. We don't want to downplay that.
Agreed,
but we all know that already, right?
But what about the majority of consumers who are on the internet looking and shopping around and wanting, more feedback from good American businesses? Zero conversation. It's as if it doesn't exist. It's as if digital marketing has zero benefit to the consumers. And that was frustrating to me.
In the combination, of course, where they kept talking about robocalls as like a monolith that includes legal calls, legal marketing, legal outbound servicing calls or notifications, along with scam and spam, and like no attempt to disambiguate, right, these things. I thought Josh did an excellent job of pointing out. I think Margot said it too, if I'm crediting people correctly, that the vast majority of the scam calls are actually coming from overseas.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and it is correct that we need to start, if we're going to solve this problem, right? Like we need to think about this problem correctly. Mm-hmm. There is two different problems. Mm-hmm. You've got the scam calls that are coming from overseas. And yes, I agree, right? There, the solution has to lie in technological, pushback on the voice service providers and the points of entry. And there just needs to be massive, maybe we pass a law that says you cannot carry overseas traffic, period. That'd be weird. That may be crazy, but you start seeing like you cannot carry short duration, high volume calls from overseas, period. Maybe that's the solution on that piece. But then you pivot over though to the legitimate servicing and marketing calls in this country, and it's a completely different solution, right? Trying to push the voice service providers, right, to identify what speech is legal and what speech is illegal from good American businesses. You got a massive First Amendment problem there. You got a massive licensing scheme problem there. You've got businesses, both whose completely legitimate traffic is now being stopped, blocked, and labeled because the carriers are afraid. And you've got carriers who are unduly being put through the ringer when they can't possibly know. They might have the best, highest end, know your customer, KYC available, meeting all the industry standards, have great policies, great procedures, and still, right, maybe even because their customer doesn't realize that a downstream party or upstream party is giving them something illegal, they're still going to carry something illegal once in a while. And Margot's saying, shut the whole thing down. It's just not thoughtful. We've got two different problems. We need to solve these two different problems with two different sets of solutions. The domestic telemarketing problem we can solve by and large with better lead generation standards, period. I'm telling you, if reach proliferates, if we get these standards accepted, if the FCC accepts our comment and adopts the reach standard, we're talking about 1 billion calls a month gone. 1 billion calls a month, just gone, right? The entire domestic problem is essentially solved by reach. The overseas problem, it's different. It's a different animal. And I think the FCC entered the ITG and with the robocall mitigation database and with additional enforcement. And I loved, Josh pointing out, just go in there and raid these Pakistani call centers and just shut them down, dude. Maybe that's the solution. So, I mean, look, we can sit back and talk for 10 minutes and solve everything, right? It's not that hard. But you can have a 2-hour sprawling hearing with people trying to grasp the things they plainly don't understand, and nothing gets accomplished. It's very frustrating. Any final thoughts?
Nope. Other than how can we get this recording to the Senate?
Oh, geez. We'll be on our YouTube channel. I know staffers over there pay close attention. The FCC, the FTC, all our regulars will tune in. And we really appreciate you joining. And as we close out here, let's again just say a couple things about the reassigned number database. We lost our graphic. At some point, there was a graphic over here that had the reassigned number database showing. Really appreciate you folks as a sponsor. Of course, REACH, one of our many standards, requires the use of reassigned number database. It's funny that it was never mentioned, right? A 2-hour hearing on robocall solutions, and probably one of the most powerful solutions that's out there that stopped, literally it's already stopped 10 billion unwanted calls, right? No mention of it. The reassigned number database. That's a great solution, and everyone should be giving it some thought. For now, though, thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to go ahead and sign off now. We really appreciate you. Tune into the next episode of Deserve to Win. Follow tcpaworld.com. And of course, we love you. And tune in next time for more truth, beauty, and telecom law. Bye, everyone.